A very good morning to you. It is 26 minutes? No, 24 minutes to 11 o'clock. You're listening to Cape Talk. I'm Kieno Kammies, and I can't wait to chat to Mark Kaplan, co-director of How to Steal a Country. Now, I'm not going to tell you the whole story. This is why I've got Mark here, else we won't have any conversations. But we know that this country was essentially looted by the Gupta family, the president and some of his cronies. Let's not forget corporate South Africa. I mean, only recently I was asked to be on a stage with Bain and Company, and I said, no, I will not be associated with the company. So we have to remember that there are corporates involved in this as well. So I'm not going to give you the whole spiel as to what this documentary is about, but I'd love to welcome Mark. It says here Mark J. Kaplan. What do you prefer? Mark Kaplan, Mark J. Kaplan? What do you prefer?
Well, there's more than one Mark Kaplan.
So we'll call you Mark J. Kaplan.
That's fine.
Okay, great. Mark J. Kaplan, great having you here in Levende Lewe. So a lot of people might get confused and go, hold on, does this emanate from the book? And the answer is no. So you had the title first, I believe.
Yes, we had the title How to Steal a Country. And then I can't remember how many months, if maybe a year later, the book was launched. It was unfortunate, but we weren't about to change our title.
No, it's a good title to have.
It's a good title. It's an appropriate title.
So you're sitting here because there is this documentary that's been done. And my question then to you is, what is the story behind this particular documentary? Before you tell us the story of the documentary, I want to know the story behind it.
Well, like yourself and like so many other South Africans, following the stories of corruption, which became a flood with the Gupta leaks, I was absolutely incensed by what was coming out of those Gupta leaks. And then I turned to my wife and I said, you know what, it's not enough to be angry. I'm a filmmaker. I have to do something about it. It's what I do. It's why I came back to the country having been deported, having been jailed under apartheid.
That's correct.
So it was a huge story. And it was a story where things were really dark in this country, where embarking on a film of this nature felt like we were back in the bad old days of apartheid. And in spite of that, it was, in fact, because of that, it was imperative to do something. And I've worked a lot with Xavier Doccie, and her brother and she and Anita, his wife, run Uhuru. And I approached them because it was such a huge story. And that's the backdrop to our then making this film.
So we've seen the books. Everybody's written a book on state capture. I've got to tell you, there's just so many books. What are you? I'm the author of something about state capture or something about the Stellenbosch Mafia. It's great to see that there's a proper documentary being made about this right now. How long is it in the making?
Quite short as far as documentaries go. So we began literally weeks after the Gupta leaks. So it's 2017. So for a documentary of this nature, it's actually relatively short.
Okay, so 2017 is when you started with all of this. And tell us, what underpins the story? And, when it comes to this particular documentary, I would imagine it's all fact-based, which is why it's a documentary. But how does it differentiate itself from a lot of what we have already read out there? Because I think differentiation is important, not just having it on a different platform.
Well, as a documentary, we tried to tell a story. And it's a complex story. It was a runaway train, so we ended up interviewing a lot of people. Yeah. And then the Zondo Commission was happening, and it was delayed in happening. And then, Zuma was delayed in coming to the commission. And then there were the, Agreezy coming to talk about Bosasa, all of which meant that, from one day to the next, like the nation itself, we didn't know what was going to be surfacing. Right. So we, in our approach, have interviewed a lot of people, and yet, because it's a documentary of a limited time span, in terms of, you can make different versions, but 1 hour version or an 80-minute version, you have to simplify. So we chose a story that showed the way in which state capture happened in this country, predominantly through the corrupt relationship between our past president, Jacob Zuma, his son, and the Gupta family.
Does it chronicle where the Guptas started and how they started amassing not only the influence but the ill-gotten gains as well? And maybe you can just give us an insight into that.
Well, yes, we do mention, that the Guptas came when they came, that they started their business selling shoes out of their car, the ethos which emanated from the father. So, our intention is to tell a story which can travel. Travel in terms of the breadth and width of this country, be understandable to whoever watches it, whether they're in high school, whether they're in small, poor communities, affected communities, or whether they're sitting in places like Trumpland or in Turkey under Erdogan, or in different places where citizens have been affected by the equivalent of state capture in their countries, because this is not just a South African phenomenon.
Well, exactly. But a lot of the narrative, as we've discussed prior to us starting this particular interview, a lot of the narrative tends to centre around, and I think rightfully so, the ANC Parliament and its majority in Parliament supporting this, quite frankly. As much as there were some people, making a couple of noises, this could never have happened without Parliament, the ANC, and obviously Jacob Zuma being president of the country. But very little gets said about the capitalists, the businesses, the people who everybody looks up to because, they're great at running businesses. Look how great KPMG used to be, hey? And all the other big names. Do you deal with that?
Yes, we do. And I'm very cognizant of one of the people we interviewed very early in our filmmaking process, Mark Swilling, who is one of the authors of the academic investigation called Betrayal.
Yes.
And he said the banks knew. The banks could have stopped this a really long time ago. And so I think, although it's not in the film as such, all the questions that I think need to be asked can be derived from watching the film. And so the legacy of apartheid, the way in which banks operated and continue to operate post-94, the way in which the corporates operated and continue to operate post-94, the way in which the arms kind of deal happened,
yes.
The nuclear deal, which is central to kind of what Zuma tried to hoist on our country. We've dodged many, many bullets, but there's a continuity of institutional mechanisms, the systemic nature of corruption that was under apartheid and sadly continued under our post-94 institutions.
So you do pull in the other historical threads of the arms deal and everything else. I mean, and that's woven into the narrative.
Yes, it is. There's a lot that's not woven into the narrative because it isn't time. So we had to make choices. So, for example, there's a mention of SARS, but there's only a mention. There's a mention of, the kind of the way in which the institutions of justice have been hollowed out. We're talking about the police or Hawks or whatever. There's a mention of these things. But in terms of telling the story, we had to make choices. And so we looked more specifically kind of and deeply at places like Eskom and Transnet. Okay. And so Bain and Company, for example, are not featured, but SAPS is featured. Yes. KPMG are featured. McKinsey are featured. The banks are featured.
I almost feel a part two in the making as we're having this particular discussion. By the way, if you've just tuned in, Mark J. Kaplan is the co-director of How to Steal a Country. He's got nothing to do with the book. They had the title long before the book came out, so let's just put it out there. And as he said, limited time in a documentary. You have to obviously choose and almost simplify what happened, but not simplify to a degree where it's whitewashed in a sense. You still deal with really core and substantive parts of what went wrong in this country.
We do. And the film, visually and otherwise, goes to places like Dubai, or goes to Hong Kong, or goes to New York, or London. So, where people are commenting also on the international connections.
Okay. Well, we might have some calls, and as a matter of fact, if you want to call in, the number to dial 021 446 0567. That's if you want to chat to us in Leeuwendelave. If you want to just send a WhatsApp voice note, maybe make a comment by typing on WhatsApp, add us as a friend on 072 567 1567. But now, why should I go and watch it in a world where I can go onto the internet, watch the latest Hollywood movie, where I've got a whole lot of other things that I need to worry about? As a matter of fact, tomorrow jobs aren't even secure anymore, and I've got to go and look at and figure out how I'm going to secure my future with all this noise. Why should I watch your documentary?
Well, then you have to ask yourself, why do I watch any documentary? And I think documentaries are really layered investigations of life around us. And our intention as documentary filmmakers is to give a viewer a sense of an ability or a chance to make sense of the world, to come to terms in some way and act on kind of what they see and hear. And in our case here with How to Steal a Country, we're hoping to follow up with a campaign to make sure that there's as much impact as can be. A campaign through the schools, through the civics, so that we believe, that the story of state capture, it's not over. And the way we tell it makes it digestible, makes it understandable, make viewers angry, hopefully give viewers agency, a sense that they should act and that they need to act and how to act.
How long is this documentary?
Well, there's different versions. So there will be an hour-long version for television,
right?
But there are longer versions for the kind of festival kind of outlets and so on.
I suppose my question earlier was more about: is there anything explosive that this particular documentary adds to the debate in terms of insights, new information, etc.? And that is why I asked the question. Obviously, we watch documentaries because it does give us an amazing insight, and it's based on fact, and all of those things. But do you share any explosive bits of content, bits of information that we've never heard before?
I think we share kind of the considered response of various key players in the story. When the Gupta leaks came out, I think everybody is waiting for a smoking gun, including the investigative journalists. There was no smoking gun. What we have are a number of incredibly brave whistleblowers who give the information to the journalists, who are absolutely vital in ensuring that the hard-won freedoms that we have are, there to be enjoyed, and that ordinary citizens feel proud to be in the country that they are living in.
Yeah,
I think at the same time, How to Steal a Country, the documentary, raises so many questions about the quality of leadership. And, what kind of decisions are being made in our name, using our money, and to what end? And, what is being the whole story of corporate and political greed is now sort of caught up in the sort of climate catastrophe situation in which we're in, where, we can't, it's a microcosm, a smaller kind of aspect of this much bigger problem that we're all facing, where kind of, a form of, capitalism is basically making a handful of billionaires rich, fossil fuel, über alles, and where the rest of us are just the victims. And we're victims because of the air we breathe, because of the jobs we lose, because of what is being ransomed, for people now. at the expense of life itself.
And I don't know if the documentary deals with this, because I went to sit and watch this documentary for the first time. So I'm interviewing you from that perspective. The one positive out of all of this, I mean, if you can take a positive out of it. Now, as a person I've been in media for 26 years, 27 years, in commercial media, and I've seen a steady decline when it comes to journalism. When it comes to, we won't even talk about certain people buying over certain newspaper groups and the quality suffering, including the facts. But to me, it was almost it felt like a dumbing down over the years, where there's juniorization of newsrooms because media don't pay enough. They end up taking corporate jobs. All the top-notch skills leave to corporate for more money. But for the one little gem I've seen in all of this is the fact that a division like Scorpio, which is part of Daily Maverick, which was started by Branko Burkic, who had magazines that didn't do too well but went online, where that little space, Amabungane, obviously initially attached to Mail and Guardian, you could have journalists that have played such a pivotal role in getting us to where we are today, which is that state capture inquiry. Yes, still no arrests, but there's a little bit of a positive in there. Does the documentary deal with that at all?
Well, the champions in the documentary are people that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And without them, and without a judiciary that held the line as well.
That's right.
And without the whistleblowers, for whom the kind of there is no real protection.
Mm-hmm.
So you become a whistleblower, and you are very, very vulnerable, and that's also part of the story. So central to the story and how we tell it is the attempt by the past president and the Guptas to control the narrative meant, the creation of New Age newspaper, NNN7.
Yes.
And that's featured, a lot in our film.
Wonderful. Well, I hope there's going to be a part 2. But I want to move away from the film now. We can chat, people can have a look at it, give us some feedback on that on air as well at some stage. But as a person who was angered, who suffered as well, as part of trying to liberate this particular country. You come back, you sit now today, 2020, you look at what's happening. How do you feel after having made this documentary?
I feel the way I've always felt. I'm angry. I'm upset.
But I mean, there was this new dawn, Mark.
Yeah.
The new dawn with all these great promises. Do you feel a little bit more optimistic now that we've got Cyril as president?
I think, I felt at the time that we were starting to make the documentary, as I said before, that it felt like we were under the apartheid kind of watchdog situation. And I felt there was a real chance that President Zuma would impose a state of emergency. And I think we came very, very close to that. And so, we still have, the tenets of a democracy. We have the freedoms which were hard won. It was much better for us that Cyril kind of, came to the helm. It would be much better still if we didn't have a divided party, the ANC.
Oh, highly compromised.
And highly compromised.
Yeah.
But the corruption we're talking about is so systemic, it runs so deep, that as much as you and I want people in orange vests serving a long time, the institutions of justice, whether they be the Hawks, whether they be the NPA, have been so badly hollowed out and still have the remnants of the old order, who I think are doing their best to sabotage any progress. All of that means that we can't afford to have a case brought and then lost.
Exactly, and that is the other side of the story. I'm glad you said that. We have people like Hemion, what's his surname? I forget his surname. Who heads the criminal investigations. You've got a wonderful NDPP at the moment, Shamila Batoy, and she's been given extended powers by the president, who doesn't seem to be taking nonsense. A far cry from Sean, I didn't know a thing, Abrams. So yes, things are looking better, but there's a big part of me that would still like to buy the president a backbone for his birthday, because there are lots of other issues that we need to deal with quite decisively, simply because we've got downgrades staring us at the face, and that would affect the poorest of the poor more than anybody else. You are listening, by the way, to Mark J. Kaplan, co-director of How to Steal a Country, the original title held by them. It is a documentary, various lengths. When I return, we'll have a quick chat about where you can catch it.
Going on Mnet on the 2nd of March.
Brilliant.
It's going to be at Biscope Theatre from the beginning of February.
Oh, excellent.
And we will keep people informed where else it's going to be running.
Send that on to us. We'll communicate.
Thank you.
Very quickly, though, how do we expect things to change when money speaks? And I told you that event I said no to with Bain, but the Western Cape government had a presence there. I'd spoken to the Premier the day before, and I said, but you know who sponsors this? But they were all still there. So how in the world do you expect change when it looks like money speaks?
I think the little person has to speak to the big person in the interest of what we're doing to the planet.
Yeah.
I think we have a leadership crisis, whether we're talking about the ANC, whether we're talking about the DA, whether we're talking about the Republican Party or the Democratic Party.
Sure.
You look across the world, politicians are interchangeable with those who rule the fossil fuel industry or the military-industrial complex. So that's the kind of world that we've inherited, and we being the global citizen. So what does a global citizen do against such forces? You have to do what you did under apartheid. You have to stand up and kind of do whatever you can. We have to be kind to each other. We have to see that the small acts that we do are important.
Yes.
It's incredible that, 20-odd years into the so-called democracy, the gap between rich and poor has grown. It's worse than it ever was at the height of apartheid. Now, part of that is because of the systemic nature of things, because there is a way in which the institutions of apartheid, whether they are political institutions or the relationship between the corporates and the politicians, all those things are deep and long-standing, and they are to be seen in the way in which rich, big, powerful money buys policy from politicians. So there are things that can be done that we need as citizens to continue to agitate for.
Well, Mark J. Kaplan, what an absolute pleasure hosting you today. We were, before this, discussing how long is it going to take. I said as long as we finish by 11, which it is right now. Co-director, How to Steal a Country. We'll give you more details about where you can actually view it. But thank you very much for tuning in.